right. Hello. And happy Friday to all of you joining us for the Logiwa Quick Take series. My name is Emma Smith. I am the marketing program coordinator here at Logiwa, and I have the happy honor of being your host for this week's webinar on warehouse reporting and analytics. Whether it's your first time joining us or you're a returning guest, we are so thrilled to have you back for our biweekly webcast on all things fulfillment and warehousing. Our hope is that you will come away from today's 15-minute webinar knowing something you didn't know before you tuned in. With that, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Jamie Babka. Jamie is the Director of Product Operations and Analytics at Logiwa, and I think it's safe to say a veteran quick take speaker. He's been with us about 5 times now. Jamie, thank you so much for returning to talk about today's topic, data-driven fulfillment, the key to competitive warehousing. Take it away.
Great. Thanks, Emma, and welcome everyone. So let's get started by discussing our topics for today's session. In today's quick take session, we'll be discussing how to use data to produce valuable and actionable reports, and we'll be providing some recommendations on how to craft an effective analytics strategy. We'll be covering 3 critical areas. The first being how to approach goal setting for reporting use cases. We'll talk about some tactics to ensure your reports are effective and actionable, and some best practices for data delivery. So that being said, we have a lot to cover today, so let's jump right into it. To start off today's presentation, I want to take a moment to discuss some of the common challenges that you may encounter when trying to implement or enhance a reporting program. There's 3 major pillars I like to talk about for any reporting program that needs to be considered. The first is your data source. Having a good data source of data allows you to create deeply insightful and reliable reports, but without a proper strategy or a proper tool to back that up, the maintenance of those reports can be really daunting, really time consuming, especially if you don't have a direction or a purpose that you're aiming for. The next major pillar is around reporting tools. Getting access to a strong reporting tool is pretty straightforward, actually. There's plenty of tools on the market for that. But without an accessible and accurate data source, and without any defined objectives, you can easily find yourself frustratedly burning hours hopelessly trying to create a meaningful report or something trustworthy enough to really make an impact. Final pillar is around strategy. Having a defined strategy and a set of goals can keep you focused on what reports matter and matter to your operations, but without a good tool, it can be challenging to create anything that's sustainable over the long term. And you'll be limited by the scope and the reliability of the data that you have access to. So a lot of folks get tripped up when creating reports or creating a reporting program when one or more of these pillars are either not in place or not strong enough. So as we go through today's content, I want to highlight a few areas where you'll see how this can impact the development of an effective reporting strategy. And with all that in mind, let's go ahead and jump into our first topic, which is about how to approach setting goals for a reporting program. So organizations that benefit from effective reporting strategies almost always lead with proper goal setting. Regardless of how much data you have or how powerful of a reporting tool you have access to, not having a proper goal in mind will most certainly lead to a creation of a slew of cool looking reports with fancy colors and charts that don't mean anything, much like this one. This is a collection of reports that was something I made using the embedded reporting tool in our WMS system. This was designed specifically to look pretty and showcase the different types of data delivery methods that we could make available. But functionally speaking, if you dive into it, it's not really offering that much in terms of actionable insights. You can't really glean much data from it. So for example, when you're looking at this report, you don't really know why you need to see how many orders are in progress and what you'd even do about it. Is that number high? Is that number low? Et cetera. There's not really an action to take. The same thing goes for some of the task reports that are listed on here. You don't really know what you can do with that information. You don't know if it's high, it's low, comparatively, et cetera. And the reason that this isn't an actionable report is because I made what I could make. I wasn't seeking any particular goal or objective in a true warehouse environment. It was a piece of collateral. So to avoid wasting time making reports that don't do anything and just look good, you need to focus on making reports that will address your goal and will focus on what you need. So let's talk about how to do that. To properly determine a set of goals, you need to start by asking yourself a series of questions. So the first set of questions is around your people, the decisions that they need to make, and the types of problems that they're trying to solve. Questions like, who are all the potential stakeholders that can benefit from consuming data? What decisions do they need to make as part of their role? What problems are they encountering? What risks are they worried about? What opportunities can they be taking advantage of? So you want to get a good list of what each of those things are, kind of break them down and have a good understanding of, who are the end consumers and what are the end objectives for these people. Once you've taken stock of the personas and the issues that they need to solve, you can then start to document different categories for the reports. There are many ways to do this, but here's one method I found particularly simple and straightforward. It's just based on frequency of need and the types of the reporting outcomes that you're looking for. The first category is tactical reports. So these are the kinds of reports that are commonly needed right now to inform some kind of immediate decision. Things like, do we need to stay an extra hour of overtime, or should Jamie be sent to do put away, or should we send Jamie to do replenishment? Then you've got your recurring reports. These are usually your scheduled administrative reports, things like monthly billing reports for clients or weekly labor reports for management teams. They're predictable, you know when they're coming. And then you've got your strategic reports. These vary by organization, but these are generally more forward-looking reports that can be used to make decisions that impact long-term. Like, should we add another packing station? Or would we benefit from implementing a cycle counting process? Once you've identified some of these reporting categories, and you now have your consumers and the problems that you need to solve, the last set of questions to ask yourself is about the integrity of your data. What are all the types of data you have access to? How much detail is in that data? Do you have things like timestamps, records of updates, who updated something, who made a change, that kind of stuff? Can you trust the data? Is it data that's, say, hand keyed by an employee or one of your clients, basically a human that's capable of making mistakes? Or is it being automatically calculated by some software? Or maybe it's coming from an external source, right? How much can you trust the data that you're looking at? And then finally, how easy is this data to use? Can you get access to it? Can you export it? Can you get to it through a reporting tool? Is it coherent, right? Is it a series of just codes and numbers and dashes, or is it broken down into readable keywords, things like that? And how often can you access it? Is it refreshed real time when you request it? Does it take a long period of time to get access to, et cetera? Understanding and knowing the depth and reliability of your data will help you prioritize where you can focus your efforts. Having an incomplete or unreliable source of a particular set of data might shift your focus away from creating reports against it and shift it towards things like finding better ways to capture it. So you might update some processes of how data gets entered, or you might look for another tool to house or generate certain sources of data instead. So after you've taken stock of all three of these parts of the equation, you can start to paint a picture of what your goals and use cases could be. So as an example, here's a couple common ones we've seen. Your inventory manager needs to know which locations need replenishment right now to cover today's picking tasks so they can coordinate the proper resources and avoid missing critical fulfillments. A great example of the tactical report. On the other side, your inventory manager might also need to know how often pickers have ran into inventory discrepancies this month versus last month or the last several months, so they can make adjustments to counting process, right? This is an example of a more strategic level report. And then finally, your billing manager might need to know how many locations were occupied by a particular client this month so that they can generate an accurate invoice for them. This is more of an administrative report. They're usually repetitive and scheduled in nature, and so that's in the recurring side of things. So going through that exercise of asking those questions will help you formulate goals like that, where you understand who the persona or the end consumer is, the activity or the type of data that they're looking to get access to, and what action they intend to take by looking at that data. And so once you have those defined goals, you can then move into creating some valuable reports for them. So in our next slide, let's talk about how to achieve some of those goals and some practices for creating valuable and useful reports. So defining your reporting objectives can be time consuming, but it makes this process of actually producing the corresponding reports a lot simpler and a lot more straightforward. And this process is actually tool agnostic. You can go through these steps with a whiteboard, sticky notes, a simple spreadsheet, or if you really want to, like a powerful BI tool, if you have access to one. But regardless of what tool you intend to use, the best practice here is to just start simple. So first, pick one of your goals, like reduce the number of missed priority orders, and gather the data from your data sources relevant to that problem from your identified sources. Then create yourself a simple proof of concept, a low effort but goal focused report that can be a good sample of what you're envisioning, and then you can work from there. So for example, let's say take a simple Excel file and literally name it, do I need to shift resources to pick priority orders so that I don't miss them, right? So it's very abundantly clear what this report's intention is, its intended purpose is for. Add just a few rows of data to it, whatever is needed to demonstrate the point, and just add a couple of columns of data like an order ID, number of lines, a quantity, and a planned ship date. Show it to the stakeholders and ask if there's any action that could be taken from it. Present it to the people that would consume it and say, like, what could you do with this report? Like, could it answer this question? Maybe you find it needs more specifics like order status or carrier data or client data in order for them to do something with it. If they give you some samples of that, great, add that in and repeat the process. After a couple rounds of validating your reports and incremental improvements like this, you'll have yourself an actionable report template that you can use to produce your final versions. By taking this low effort, iterative approach, you'll find yourself with several actionable report templates that will help you achieve your defined reporting goals. Once you have this slew of different reporting templates, I recommend you group these together into various report collections based on your stakeholders or their roles. Things like, here's the collection of inventory manager reports or a collection of supervisory reports. Those collections will then have a series of various reports with them with the problems they aim to solve. So the collection itself kind of has a summary of the types of problems they aim to address. And this can be helpful for later on in maintaining and training on what these reports do and helping you understand what types of problems you're solving. During this process, you'll most likely find that there's some reports or some problems that you can't solve, either due to lack of data or data coherency. Maybe there's lack of access or some other kind of blocker that keeps you from being able to pull this data. And that's fine, that's expected. You should document what those things are so that you can understand or take a project on later to find ways of collecting that data or get a tool that can help you collect that a little bit better. But now that you've collected these collections of action-oriented reports, it's time to talk about the how and the when part of this process, which is data delivery. So most folks think of fancy dashboards and colorful visualizations when they imagine robust reporting. But oftentimes we end up settling for things like simple tables or bar charts. And the truth is sometimes that is just the best way to present data. Reports are notorious for being over-engineered and difficult to digest. So here's just some general guidelines and best practices when you're finalizing at least the first iteration of a presentation for your reports. Tactical reports, so things like, what locations do I need to replenish to avoid impacting picking today? These are usually best as things as simple tables, even though sometimes a bar chart might be good for visual comparison or just a quick glance. Reports like, do I need more people on put away or receiving right now? Things like pie charts are great for that because you can have that comparative element to it. But regardless of which presentation option you use, a simple visual or a table, the speed is the most important and critical part of the data and the report. Like, how quickly can someone digest the information that they're looking at? So you want to try and limit these to 1 to 2 primary metrics per report. If you tried to make one super report that covers 10 different use cases at the same time, you'll find that folks are going to stare at them for a full minute trying to understand what the data is actually trying to tell them. And most often, you're probably better off with just 2 to 3 or 4 separate reports that address specific needs. Recurring reports like administrative or billing data, these are almost exclusively tables of flattened data or several data sets, just due to the amount of data that's usually needed for them. There's a lot of different metrics and data points, and trying to cram those into a visual, it's difficult and visually overwhelming to do that. So these end up, you end up with a result that's a table. Strategic reports, things like, do I need to add another packing station? These are almost always visualized because it's easier to communicate or to visualize the trends over time or the comparisons over time by putting all this data into a visual. It's usually summarized and averaged and aggregated so that you can take a large swaths of data and simplify it down into a understandable and digestible trend. The next delivery component to consider is your frequency and the direction, or the push and pull of the reports. Knowing this can help you decide what tool to use or which tool that you need in order to generate them. So tactical reports, these are generally needed more in real time. This is things that are pulled several times a day, the things you need right now. These reports need to be templatized and ready to pull at any given moment, as to not waste time fiddling with things like filters and adding columns and downloading it, etc. Recurring reports, since these are predictable, you usually need them at the same time every week or every month. It's a good idea that these get pushed and push them out on some type of a schedule. So a tool that's able to accept that template, push that data out and push it out in a table will minimize your overhead and will help automate some processes. Strategic reports may not be needed as frequently. Again, this depends on organization, but these can be very complex, especially if you're going to try to build them on the fly. Strategic reports normally merge in several different data sets, several different trends. And so having a starting template that you can start with to pull and then potentially modify for future use or to pull ad hoc as needed is a best practice for these types of reports. Things like lines and bar charts, things like that. And then finally, it is important to understand how you're going to maintain and improve this strategy over time. I'm sure many of you have experienced a reporting tool that's bloated with hundreds of most certainly useless reports, but you aren't confident enough to know whether or not they're still being used. So you don't want to touch them or update them or remove them to fear that they might still be in use. And this can really slow down and reduce the value of any kind of effective reporting program. So documenting your use cases can really help with this. This can reduce that bloating and help you understand what these reports are getting used for and make it easier to get to that point to make an update or to an addition for a problem that you're not addressing. So make sure to be deliberate and create a process to monitor these reports. If they're becoming unusable or redundant, you need to update or eliminate them, or they're just going to get in your way. Finally, as your organizational needs change, the need for new reports is going to continue to grow. This usually involves capturing new data that you may not have access to today. So part of this ongoing feedback process should be anchored around the identification of data gaps and plans to get access to it. And depending on what type of tools and systems that you're using as part of your operation, some tools have better reporting functionality or ability to connect with other systems than others. And so, understanding how big of a gap that missing data is to your operations is really important and something that you should plan that, you might not need it today, but maybe in the future, you're going to need access to it. So we covered 3 different topics there. And so I want to take a few minutes to look at just a basic example of these concepts before we wrap up with some of our key takeaways from today's discussion. So here's a sample dashboard that I created with some action-based reports. I built this in our built-in BI tool as a sample, but just a couple of things to cover some of our key points. So in the upper left report, it might be a little small, but in the upper left, what you can see is a locations to replenish report. This is just a simple table. It's got 5 columns and it shows you the SKU, the location, and a total quantity of units. I've pre-filtered it to SKUs where the safety limit is below a certain threshold. And this is just a very quick, digestible, and actionable report. An inventory manager could look at that and see, I have 7 different locations that I need to run a replenishment against. Very straightforward. I even literally named the report that. In the upper right, you can see a what tasks need people report. This is just a simple pie chart, so you can easily compare high concentrations of open task types. You can see here that multi-items is the biggest, so it's got the biggest backlog. Obviously, operations could be more complex than that, but you could just look at that from a weighted number and say, that's what I need to do. That's where I need to send people. In the bottom left, another tactical report example is the priority orders I need to ship today. It's just a single column bar chart, nothing overly complicated, with a couple preset rulers that a supervisor could use to gauge if there's any action needed to be taken in order to address it. I put 3 different example layers in there of just is this are we just kind of generally busy, or are we at the point where we need to pull in some backup to help? In the bottom right is more of a strategic example. So this is do we have a growing problem with inventory counts report. It's a bar chart, and it's showing you the quantity of reported missing inventory over the past several quarters. So this is a strategic report, someone that a supervisor or manager could use to inform a decision on whether or not that a counting process, for example, might be necessary. If you're looking at that data, you might say like, well, last year in Q1 and Q3, we had kind of a tough time, but it seems like the last couple of quarters have been okay. I can use that data to make a decision that this is not something that I'm going to invest some additional resources into. Hopefully this quick sample just ties together some of the key concepts that we've discussed today for creating an effective reporting strategy for optimizing your operations and your decision-making processes. Just wrap up here with a couple of key takeaways, and then I'll pass this back over to Emma. So 3 key takeaways. Number 1, reporting can be a massive time sink. You can avoid a lot of this by outlining a reporting strategy upfront before investing in a tool or the creation of reports. Number 2, reports that don't prompt action are generally useless. They might be interesting, but they're generally useless. Define your reports around problems, not what you can do. And then finally, be deliberate and intentional when you're defining expectations for your presentation or your schedule. Don't use charts when tables are better, for example. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for your time today, and I will pass this back over to Emma to take us out. Emma?
Jamie, thank you so much. As always, your experience and knowledge is invaluable to us. All right, folks, thank you so much for joining today's quick take on reporting and analytics. If you're looking for more information or materials on the topics Jamie discussed today, I encourage you to reach out to us or visit our website at www.logiwa.com, where you can find a wide variety of resources on warehouse management. I'd also like to take a moment to invite you all to register for our upcoming webinar. Shoot the link to you right there. We'll be partnering with Locus Robotics on August 18th to discuss the power of automation in warehousing and fulfillment. So we'll be talking about warehouse digitalization, artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, and more. And Jamie will also be part of that, so you'll get to see a familiar face. We'll stick around for a few more minutes to answer your questions, but that concludes today's session. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody.